When I die, I would prefer to do so in company, not alone with machines. I especially want to have the company of those I love around me, to hear their prayers whispered in my ears, to feel their hands grasping my hands. Such prayer, such touch could ease my journey from this world to the world to come. But will the people I love be able to break through the sterile barricades so often erected between the dying and the living by the American healthcare system? As they say in old gangster movies, none of us is getting out of here alive. But whatever the old movies said, the news media nowadays have expurgated death from what we see. Allow me to share with you what it means for me as a Catholic Christian, a Jesuit for 58 years and a priest for 47, to face my death as I have faced the deaths of others. During the past 58 years, I have spent 26 years in West Africa, the most vivid years of my life. And I still visit Africa annually, especially Nigeria and Ghana. Let me tell you about a Muslim friend of mine in Ghana whose death 35 years ago remains painfully etched in my memory, precisely because, as was also the case with my mother's death, I was not able to be with him, to accompany him on that final journey. My friend was called Malam Baba. I used the nickname by which he was best known in Accra. It means Papa Teacher. His real name was Musa ibn Muhammad. Early in his life, he had prayed professionally for politicians and business entrepreneurs. He was reputed to be mustajab al-dua, to use a technical term from Sufism, one whose prayer is answered. Such was the mundane success of his prayers that he lived in a modest house, a bit more substantial than many others in Nima, the central section of Accra. As he aged and his sight deteriorated, a side effect of a brain tumor, Malam Baba became more interior, more concentrated on God. He finally spurned the idea of petitionary prayer made for financial reward. When I first sought out Malam Baba, I wanted to learn from him the history of the Tijaniya Sufi confraternity in Accra. Malam Baba, although a devout Tijani, had no interest in discussing history. He wanted instead to talk with me about God, about Jesus, about Muhammad. And so we did, weekly for about a year. In all the time I knew Malam Baba, his radical entrusting of himself to God, what is called tawakkul in Arabic, moved me deeply. His only interest was God, and he wanted to know about my experience of God. I finally stopped taking any notes during our conversations. He was not to be the object of my scholarly curiosity. About a year after I first started to visit Malam Baba, I went on a sabbatical to the United States. Before I left, fuel shortages and general chaos in Accra made it impossible for me to get to Malam Baba's house and bid him farewell, although he knew about my upcoming sabbatical. While I was away, some of Malam Baba's disciples came by taxi to look for me at my house on the campus of the university, hoping that my sabbatical was over. Malam Baba's brain tumor had worsened and he was dying. He wanted to talk with me once again before the end. Alas, just as I was far away from America when my mother died 10 years later, so too I was far away from Ghana when Malam Baba died. I was unable to be with either of them at the end. When I heard of Malam Baba's death on my return from sabbatical, I was dumbstruck. It is still difficult for me, even today, to deal with that loss. Neither with Malam Baba nor with my mother was I able to share their final journeys. I have learned a lot from both Christians and Muslims over the past 5 decades since I first lived in West Africa. I first read the Surah of the Cave, Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th Surah of the Quran, when I was a graduate student at Harvard in 1969. In the years since then, I have come to realize more poignantly the meaning of that surah, and especially its narrative about the 7 youthful sleepers who woke up from death, but who went back to the sleep of death to await the day of resurrection, to which they bore eloquent witness. Along with its Christian parallels, such as the poem on the sleepers of Ephesus by the 6th and 7th century Syrian Christian monk Mar Jacob of Sarug, the Surah of the Cave has enabled me to understand partly the common treasure we Muslims and Christians share in our fears and hopes when confronted with death. The people of the cave, in both Christian and Muslim narratives, were youths who lived together in faith, who fell asleep together in hope, hidden away from the enemies of their faith and hope, and who rose together in love to bear witness to God and to the day when all of us will rise again. What, you may ask yourselves, will the Quranic and Syriac Christian narratives about the people of the cave have to say to us about the interstices of theology and biomedicine at the borderline of death? There are motifs of Mar Jacob's poem and in the Quranic narrative that I wish to underline. Mar Jacob recounts the persecution of Christians during the short reign of the Roman Emperor Decius from 249 to 251 of the Common Era. During a visit to Ephesus, Decius tries to impose sacrifice to the gods of imperial Rome on Christian Ephesians, including these boys who hid in a cave to avoid apostasy. There they slept, thinking it was only for a night. Mar Jacob says that, and I quote him directly, "The Lord saw the faith of the dear lambs, and took their spirits and raised them up above to heaven, and left a watcher to be guarding their limbs." By a watcher, Mar Jacob apparently means an angel who accompanied them in their death and who guarded their bodies in the cave while their souls went to heaven. Centuries later, well into the history of the Eastern Christian Roman Empire, stones were removed from the entrance of the tomb. Mar Jacob says, "Light entered in and awoke the children of light." Thinking they had only slept one night, the boys sent one of their number into Ephesus to buy food with ancient coins. Those coins startled the Christians of Ephesus and finally led them to the mountain retreat where the boy and his companions had slept since the persecution of Decius. The Christian emperor Theodosius is brought into the picture. He even tries to persuade the boys to relocate in downtown Ephesus, where the emperor promises he will build a shrine over their bodies. But the boys prefer their mountain cave, declaring that the shepherd who chose us is the one who bade us be here. They envision their role to be witnesses. They say, "For your sake has Christ the Lord awoken us, so that you might see and hold firm that the resurrection truly exists." In a touching final detail, the Emperor Theodosius covers the boys with his cloak as they return to the sleep of death. The Quranic story of the seven sleepers lacks the Christian details in the version preserved by Mar Jacob. As is true with so many of the stories in the Quran, it presumes familiarity with the narrative already, not because Muhammad had read it, Muslims generally deny his literacy, but because the story of the sleepers of Ephesus had entered into the oral tradition of Arabia through Christians living there. Muhammad may have known this story already as a youth on the Syrian caravan route, but the Prophet experienced the story precisely as revelation only when his Meccan compatriots challenged his teaching about the hour of judgment and the resurrection of the dead. God's voice in the Quran sums up the lesson of the dying and rising sleepers. This is Quran 18:21. "Thus did we bring them," the companions of the cave, "to the attention of the faithless, so that they might know God's promise is true, and that there is no doubt about the hour," meaning the hour of the resurrection. In the Christian story of the sleepers of Ephesus, God is said to have appointed an angelic watcher over the seven youths in their cave tomb. In the Quran, God himself is said to have watched over the sleepers, and even watched over their dog with the tenderness of a mother. Quran 18, verse 17 says, "We, God, turned them over, rocking them to the right and to the left, while their dog stretched out its legs." My intent in quoting just a few words from this passage from the Quran and from the Syriac poem of Mar Jacob is to make a very simple point about how we care for the dying. In the hospitalization of the terminally ill, in the United States at least, every effort seems to be made to ensure a sterile environment while the dying are plugged into respirators, monitors, and other elaborate machinery to keep them breathing, responding to treatment, doing what the system thinks they should do. I would prefer to return to Africa before I become terminally ill, so that I can die surrounded by friends. It may not be that hygienic, but I would rather be spoken to, prayed with, turned over in bed, accompanied by friends as I set off on my final journey. An African hospital ward seems to me more Christian, more Muslim, more human than the solitary confinement I glimpse through the windows of intensive care units in modern American hospitals. As a nearer American equivalent to an African hospital, a hospice or hospice care at home for the terminally ill seems to offer the best possibility for decent death in this century and this country. Let people die surrounded by those they love. Save them from possibly well-meaning, but actually death-dealing ministrations by professionals, medical and especially legal. Give them palliative care, care that will ease their pain as well as ease their anxiety. Pray with them. Do not, in the interest of economy or efficiency, withdraw something so simple as hydration. Ration may be some of the mind-dulling painkillers and the machinery that keeps one breathing even when the brain is dead. But do not ration water or hydration until the brain indicates that life itself is quenched. I thirst, Jesus cried out on the cross, according to John's Gospel. The dying thirst for water and for more than water, for the human touch, the human word, assurance of a love that lives on beyond death. The monk and poet Thomas Merton, whose brother died of thirst on an island in the North Sea where his plane had crashed in World War II, wrote about his brother's death from the perspective of Merton's own experience of his early life as a monk in Kentucky. I quote him, "Sweet brother, if I do not sleep, my eyes are flowers for your tomb. And if I cannot eat my bread, my fast shall live like willows where you died. If in the heat I find no water for my thirst shall turn to springs for you, poor traveler." Hospice makes it possible for all of us to accompany the dying on their journey into life, to quench their thirst, to soothe their loneliness. Al-Bika lillahi, Muslims say in Arabic. Only God is everlasting. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Truly we belong to God, and to God alone we will return. The Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah 156. In the Catholic Christian tradition we pray, may their souls and the souls of all the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen. I miss you, Malam Baba. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I was not there with you at the end. I know we will meet again on Yom Al-Qiyamah, the day of the resurrection. When we both arrive there, or much better and theologically then, I want to introduce you to my mother.